want to tell Daddy a story?
Yes.
Okay, tell me any story then.
Once upon a time, there was a boy named Eric. One day, Eric was taking a nap, and then there was a fire coming up, and then he gets out of the place, and then the fireman's put it out, and then Eric moved to a new house, and then there was no fire, and everyone happily ever after.
Oh, hi kids! Are you ready for storytelling time with your Uncle Asia? Okay, that sounds super creepy, I know, but I think this is like the perfect environment right now for the topic of this week's video. It's nighttime, everybody's cozied up in bed, so let's talk about storytelling. Now, if you know me, normally I would do my videos during the day in my office, but I think sometimes it's better to do it at night. Now, I would normally record upstairs in my office, but everybody's asleep, so I thought I'd take you down here in my living room, set the mood a little bit, but I can't stay in this outfit because I've been wearing this all day and it doesn't fit the theme, so let me change into something a little bit more nighttime comfortable. Give me a second. That's better. Storytelling. Okay, before we begin, I want you to think about your most favorite movie. Don't overthink it, just the first movie that comes to mind that you absolutely love. And hopefully, by the end of this episode, you'll be able to break down that movie, or any novel you've ever read, or any story you've ever heard, and see all the inner workings, all the puppet strings that made that story so compelling. So I'll take my guilty pleasure movie, which is The Karate Kid. No, millennials. This one. Not this one. Like, I don't even know why they called it The Karate Kid, because clearly it was Kung Fu, but as an Asian person, I digress. So remember that movie, and as I start to talk about storytelling, see if you can spot how the storytelling formula applies to the movie that you chose. Okay, so what's a story? Now, every time I ask that question, people give me a variety of answers, and they get super deep and guarded about that answer too. They get all philosophical about symbolism and metaphor and, how it relates to people. It's not that deep. A story is nothing more than a beginning, a middle, and an end. That's it. You don't need to complicate it. Take my son's story, for example. He was in a house, a fire broke out. Firemen came, they put it out, and he moved to a new house where there was no fire. End of story. Now, obviously, it's not the best story in the world. I mean, he's 6, but it's still a story nonetheless. So when we think of beginning, middle, and end, we can also think of it as an A, B, and C. Now you take the A, B, and C, and now you have a timeline of your story. So then what moves that story along? Your character. And a character can be anything that has life. You can have animals as a character. You can have inanimate objects as characters. You can have robots as characters. Anything that has life or has a soul. Now the main character in our story begins in A. And we'll call this character the protagonist. And the protagonist wants something. It has a desire. Doesn't matter what it is, right? Could be anything. In the case of the Karate Kid, Daniel was our protagonist, and what did he want? Well, at first, he wanted to move back to Jersey where he came from because he kept getting bullied, so he wanted to get away. And if he can't have that, then he would like to at least stop the bullying. He also had another desire, which is getting the girl that he liked. And now at this point, when our protagonist has recognized that they want something, they now have a choice to make. To either attempt at getting what they want,
Yay!
or not. And if they don't, well then, story ends there. If Daniel decides, oh, you know what, I'm not going to fight these bullies, then the story ends and we have no movie. Kind of boring. Now, a story doesn't actually begin until our protagonist decides to take action and goes on a quest to get what they want. And it's at this point our protagonist goes from A, beginning, to B, middle. And here is where they run into conflict. Every story has to have a conflict, because if there's no conflict and our protagonist just gets what they want right away, well then the story ends and that's not really interesting at all, right? If Asia wants an ice cream and Asia gets his ice cream, well then the story ends and that was a waste of time, right? But if, let's say, Asia gets his ice cream, but then realizes that he's lactose intolerant and now he's on a quest to find a toilet, well, now we have something. And obstacles can be different things. Sometimes it's circumstances that's keeping our protagonist from getting what they want. Or sometimes it's another character that is hell-bent on making sure that our protagonist never gets what they want. And those characters are who we call antagonists. Sometimes they're evil, like villains with super evil plans, or sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're just another character who's just in the way, right? And sometimes it's someone with just opposing views to our protagonist, and now there's conflict between the two. Regardless, our protagonist now has to fight these obstacles in order to get what they want. In Karate Kid, our protagonist, Daniel, is met by his antagonist, Johnny, who wants to humiliate him and deny him the girl he likes. So obviously they have to fight. And it's at this point that he meets Mr. Miyagi, who then teaches him karate and then trains him for that upcoming fight. Now eventually, whatever conflict our protagonist is facing will reach a climax. And that usually falls somewhere between the middle and the end. In Karate Kid, this is the part where Daniel fights all of his Cobra Kai bullies in that big tournament. The climax is where our protagonist will either get what they want or they won't. And after the climax, that's when we move to C, end. And this is where the resolution to all that conflict is revealed. Now, does our protagonist always get what they want? Hell no. I mean, sure, in Karate Kid, he did get what he wanted. He beat all of his bullies and everybody lived happily ever after and we all shouted hooray, but not all stories end that way. In fact, sometimes the best stories are when our protagonist never gets what they wanted. Now, here's the important takeaway. Whether our main character gets what they want or not is not the point. The point of every story is this: who our main character was in A is no longer the same character they become in C. Somewhere along their quest, they became transformed, and that is the point of every story. The character development, the arc, how they became a different character by the end and how it changed them. So to recap, a story is a beginning, a middle, and an end. And it's moved along by a character who wants something, decides to go after it, runs into conflict trying to get it, and by the end is somehow transformed by their quest, whether they got what they wanted or not. That's it. That's all a story is. Now, if you take the storytelling formula and apply it to your favorite movie or favorite novel that you picked out at the beginning of this episode, I can almost guarantee that it pretty much lines up, because this is how all stories pretty much play out. Now, obviously, there are different writers who will deviate from this formula here and there, but they never deviate that far because this is what works. This is the fundamentals of storytelling. Now, we can delve deeper into this formula and start talking about all the other facets that make up a story, like subplots and the difference between heroes and anti-heroes and protagonists and antagonists and villains. And we can go into all of that at length, but it would just make this video way too long. And right now, I just want you to grasp the concept of storytelling. Now, here comes the surprise ending to this whole thing. You ready? A great writer is not always someone who can spin the most complex story. It's not about how intricate or how complicated your plot is. In fact, most of the best stories usually are the simplest. What makes your story better than all the other stories is your ability to tell that simple story using vivid imagery and character development. It's not the story that's complex. It's the world that you create. It's the soul you put into your characters. Many of the greatest stories ever written have such simple plots, but they were written so well that we couldn't help but get lost in the world that they created and invest ourselves into the characters that are in it. Take Star Wars, one of the best and biggest film franchises of all time, filled with thousands of different characters, different universes and galaxies and all these cool things like spaceships and lightsabers, but at the core of it all, it's really just the rebels trying to defeat the Empire. Like, That's it. Now, deep in there, there are other different subplots and different characters with their own desires and their own quests and things like that. But at the core base of it all, it's really just rebels trying to defeat the Empire. What makes the story so amazing are all the things that they put in there, the worlds that they create, and the characters that we get so invested in and we want to follow their journey. That's what makes it interesting. But the plot isn't really that complicated. It's just rebels trying to defeat the Empire. Now, if we wanted to, we could take the simple story my son told of him being in a house caught on fire, firemen came and put it out, and then now he moved to a house that doesn't have fire. That story, as simple as that is, we could take that, build a world around it, start putting some great characters in there, have a desire, have a climax, have a resolution, and before you know it, we have a pretty great story on our hands. Now think about the story you've been wanting to write and see if you can break it down to its most simplest form, a beginning, a middle, and an end. In fact, you should be able to pitch your story just by saying those 3 sentences, the beginning, the middle, and an end. And once you have that intact, once you can look at it and go, yes, this is the story, as simple as this is, then write the hell out of it. Create a world around it. Put souls into the characters that you put in it. Invest us in the writing. And I can guarantee you, you will have an amazing story. That's it. That's all I have in terms of the fundamentals of storytelling. In the future, I do want to do videos that will go more into detail about the different facets of storytelling, but right now I just wanted to make sure that you understand the basic concept. But do join me next week for part 2 of the Art of Storytelling series, where I will teach you how to comb through your life in search of stories worth telling. You'd be surprised what you'll find there. A lot of people come to me all the time and say, well, Asia, my life is kind of boring. There's nothing worth writing about. Oh, there are. And I'll show you how to find them. And then after that, we'll move on to part 3, where I'll teach you how to take those stories and turn them into a spoken word poem. Until then, make sure you like this video, share it with everybody, subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to follow us on all of our social media platforms at The Asia Project. My name is Asia Sampson. Like I say every week, speak like you mean it. Good night, children.